Larry King, the most famous interviewer on CNN, has died at age 87. Hi there, thanks for joining us for Plain English lesson number 337. I'm Jeff. JR is the producer, and the full lesson is online at plainenglish.com/337. Coming up today, Larry King, one of the most famous radio and TV hosts in America, has died. He was on the radio and television for over half a century, and he hosted the highest-rated cable television talk show, Larry King Live, on CNN. I'll also tell you about the one time I heard Larry King in person. The expression is partial to, and JR has a song of the week. Larry King, the most recognizable face on CNN for decades and a prolific interviewer, died last month at age 87. Larry was on a first-name basis with the most famous celebrities, the most powerful politicians, and millions of callers and viewers during his half-century career in broadcasting, starting on the radio in Florida and ending with an online interview show in the 21st century. Larry King first became known to Americans as host of a national radio program that was on the air from midnight to 5:30 a.m., 5.5 hours on the air each day, or I should say each night. He would interview a guest for 90 minutes, take calls from the listening audience with the guest for 90 minutes, and then spend the rest of the program taking calls from the audience about whatever they wanted to talk about. He did that from 1978 through 1994. The show started small, but was eventually syndicated to over 500 radio stations in the U.S. Larry King, however, is best known for his television interview show on CNN. It began in June 1985 when CNN was just 5 years old. His show became the most popular show on CNN, attracting over 1 million viewers a night. It lasted 25 years, a record for a single host in a single time slot, 9 p.m. Eastern. It was just an hour, so the format was different from the radio show. He would interview a guest, it could be anyone, and then he would sometimes take calls from the audience on the air. We'll get to that part in a second, but first, the guests. He talked to everyone: celebrities, politicians, victims of crime, criminals themselves, celebrity lawyers, experts on UFOs, psychics, sports stars, royalty, dictators, anyone. He interviewed over 50,000 people in his career. He interviewed every American president since Richard Nixon. He interviewed Vladimir Putin shortly after he became Russia's president in 2000. He interviewed Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad at a time when the U.S. president refused to talk to him. Larry interviewed the Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi and Venezuelan president for life Hugo Chavez. He interviewed serious figures, Margaret Thatcher, Nelson Mandela, Mikhail Gorbachev, and not so serious figures like Kermit the Frog and a guy who promised to talk to your deceased relatives for you. Larry was especially partial to celebrity gossip and crime, dedicating numerous shows to the death of Michael Jackson, the murder trial of football star O.J. Simpson, the overdose death of the model Anna Nicole Smith, and countless other sensational crimes and celebrity controversies. Larry had a soft interview style, meaning that he didn't ask direct, probing questions. His philosophy was that he wanted to let the guests do the talking. If he had an author on the show, Larry didn't read the author's new book. He simply asked on the show, "What's it about?" and took the conversation from there. Guests knew they would get this kind of treatment on Larry King Live, which is why some controversial people chose Larry King's show when they wanted to do an American interview. Larry opened his interview with the Libyan dictator by saying, "You've been in power since 1978. It's a long time." And then he let Gaddafi speak. Other times, he hosted debates between guests. He'd have political debates between candidates. He'd host people to debate philosophical or religious questions like, why does God allow people to do bad things? Or what happens when we die? Larry would often let CNN viewers call in and pose questions to the guests, including sometimes the famous guests. The callers didn't get the cushy softball treatment the guests got. He had a gruff style with callers, honed during his years doing late-night radio. He never identified a caller by name. He addressed callers by their city. He'd bark out, "Albuquerque, New Mexico, you're next," or "Staten Island, New York, hello." When Larry King said hello to a caller, it wasn't a greeting. It was a direct order to get right to the point. The set on CNN was very simple. King and his guests would sit at a Y-shaped desk. There was a microphone, a coffee cup, and a small clock on the desk, a nod to Larry's radio heritage. The microphone was just a prop. Larry and his guests used lapel microphones. The background was a black wall with a stylized map of the world made out of brightly colored dots. When the camera zoomed out, it was clear that it was a map of the world, but in close-up shots, you just saw a blur of blue, red, and yellow lights on a black background behind the person speaking. Larry was always dressed the same way. He wore a dress shirt, a tie, his black-rimmed glasses, and his one signature article of clothing, suspenders. Suspenders are fabric loops that clip onto the waistband of your pants and loop over your shoulders. It's a way to keep your pants up without having to wear a belt. Larry started wearing them after he had surgery and lost weight. Larry King had a turbulent personal life. He was married 8 times to 7 women. He married his high school girlfriend. He married a math teacher. He married a businesswoman. He married an actress. And he married a Playboy bunny model. That's the one he married twice. He once got married in his hospital room as he was preparing to have heart surgery. He was born Lawrence Ziegler in Brooklyn in 1933, but he always wanted to be on the radio. He went to Florida to work as an assistant at a radio station. The morning DJ quit, and the station manager asked him to take over. Minutes before his first broadcast in 1957, the station manager decided he didn't want Lawrence Ziegler on the air. That wasn't a name for show business. So it was decided at the last minute that Lawrence Ziegler would thereafter be Larry King. Here's a funny story. I was at the Museo Sumaya Museum in Mexico City. The museum has a unique layout. You walk in on the ground floor, and the exhibits are on ramps that circle the perimeter of the interior. So as you walk through the exhibits, you're actually walking up the museum in a spiral pattern until you get to the top, about the equivalent of 7 floors up. And the whole time you can see down to the lobby and across to the other side. I was up on probably the 4th floor. And since it's a spiral, you can look down at the lobby from almost any point in the museum. So I was up there on the 4th floor, and I heard Larry King's voice. He had a voice that you would not mistake. There is no other voice like it. I heard it, and I said, "That's Larry King." Remember, this is the 4th floor of a museum in Mexico City. This is not the Metropolitan Museum of Art on 5th Avenue or the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. But I heard the voice and I said, "That's Larry King. Where is he?" And so I looked down to the lobby, and sure enough, there are Larry King and his wife posing for photographs in the lobby. And that just shows you how unique his voice was, but also how many times I had heard it over the years. I had probably not heard Larry King's voice in many years at that point, but it was a voice that I will never forget. Today's expression is a good one, partial to. Partial to means you have a preference for something, and we usually use it with categories of things. I'll explain more about what I mean in a second. Larry King was partial to celebrity interviews and sensational crime stories. That means Larry King had a preference for this one category, this one type of story, celebrity interviews and sensational crime stories. Yes, he had a preference for those types of stories, but that wasn't all he did. We talked about all the interviews he did, 50,000 of them. World leaders, actors, authors, media celebrities, sports stars, business leaders. But he had a lot of people talking about celebrity scandals and sensational crimes. The O.J. Simpson murder trial took up a lot of media attention in 1995, but Larry King gave his show over to the trial for weeks on end. The attorneys would argue their case in the courtroom during the day and then go on Larry King Live at night. Larry King would interview the witnesses and experts night after night, an hour devoted to the O.J. trial. And it was the same with so many other high-profile crimes. A child model named JonBenet Ramsey was murdered. Larry King had the parents on the show. He had the police on the show. He was partial to this type of story. He liked it. It wasn't all he did. He did a lot of other stuff, and he did a lot of other stuff well. But he did clearly have a preference for this kind of story. Let's think about food for a second. What kind of food are you partial to? I like a lot of food. Fish in the oven, a bowl of pasta with meatballs, a salad with chicken, a sandwich every now and then. But if you've been listening long enough, you know I'm partial to meat on the grill. Pork chops, steaks, burgers, sausages. Come summertime, I'm more often than not having something on the grill for dinner. Now, that's not all I eat. It's not the only thing I like, but I have a preference for it. Remember, this is about categories, not specific things. I'm partial to cooking on my grill. That's a category of food. I would not say I'm partial to pork chops with asparagus. That's too specific. I'm partial to cooking on the grill because that's a category. If you have a favorite sports team, you would not say that you're partial to that team because that's too specific. But if your preferences change or if you're not 100% committed to a team, you can use partial to. You might say you're partial to a style of play or a type of team. University sports are big here. I was watching college basketball as I wrote this lesson. Many of the biggest and most famous universities have big and famous sports programs, but some smaller schools also manage to have good sports teams. I'm partial to the smaller schools. If a small university is playing a big university, I'll root for the smaller schools. I'm partial to them. It's not like I always root for them. We're not talking about a hard and fast rule, but I went to a smaller school. No good sports teams, but still, I went to a smaller school, so I'm partial to the smaller schools like Gonzaga or Creighton or Butler or others in the same category. I have a slight preference for them. When you travel, you might have preferences for activities. It doesn't mean you refuse to do other things, but you have preferences. I mentioned that I heard Larry King's voice in the Museo Sumaya in Mexico City. I recommend that museum if you like history and great art. They have old coins from hundreds of years ago, old firearms, old postage stamps. They have great art, too. Sculptures from Rodin, paintings from El Greco. Some people like to go to the biggest and best museums a city has to offer, and Museo Sumaya is a great one. However, it might not be for everyone. For example, if you're partial to more contemporary art, then maybe you'd enjoy Museo Jumex next door. Others are partial to smaller, more specialized museums. If you're partial to the smaller museums, you might try the Frida Kahlo House instead. I'm partial to art that at least attempts to depict reality. I walked through that Museo Jumex and I got bored. Contemporary art is just not my style. I'm partial to landscapes, cityscapes, photography. It doesn't have to be a perfect depiction of reality, but for me, it has to come close. JR's Song of the Week is Small Town Boy by Bronski Beat. The lyrics are sad. It's about a young gay man who's forced to leave home after being isolated, ostracized, and targeted for abuse in his small town. The video is really sad. In one scene, you see the man leaving home. He gets a hug from his mother and a little money from his father, but his dad refuses to shake his hand. Small Town Boy by Bronski Beat is JR's Song of the Week. And that's all for today's lesson. It was a long one, so we'll wrap up now. Just remember, if improving in English is part of your 2021, then JR and I invite you to come along with us in Plain English Plus, which will help you sound more natural, express your ideas, learn new words, and improve your confidence in English. You can learn more about that at plainenglish.com/plus, plainenglish.com/plus.